Young Charlie by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
On September 21, 1969, about 260 miles north of Los Angeles, National Park Service Ranger Dick Powell observed a red Toyota four-wheel drive vehicle heading down a road in Death Valley. Inside were a young man and several girls. The car piqued his curiosity. 2 days earlier, park rangers had investigated a case of arson on a back road near the Barker Ranch. An earth mover belonging to the federal government had been stripped of its parts and set ablaze. Tire tracks leading from the burned-out hulk had been determined to belong to a Toyota four-wheeler. The rangers soon learned that a band of hippies was living in the desert and that one of their vehicles was a red Toyota. Ranger Powell decided to question the occupants. He signaled for them to pull over, but by the time he reached the car, the male had jumped out and scurried into the brush. The girls gave him little useful information, responding to direct questions with oblique, trippy answers. Before letting them go, he took down the license plate. When he returned to the Inyo County office of the Park Service, he learned that the plate didn't belong to the Toyota. The park rangers contacted the California Highway Patrol. They immediately decided that a joint team would investigate what was going on at the Barker property. You can listen to episodes of Young Charlie and Hollywood and Crime right now on Spotify. Download Spotify today to access it from your phone or desktop and listen to Young Charlie for free. From Wondery, I'm Tracy Patton with Stephen Lang. Today, Hollywood and Crime presents Young Charlie. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend you go back and listen to the previous episodes. We'll be waiting for you. Today's episode, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Here's my co-host, Stephen Lang.
The staff at Terminal Island Penitentiary in San Pedro doesn't think Charlie has much of a chance. Though his IQ now tests at a bright normal, 121, and his verbal skills are considered good, he's small and baby-faced. Combined with no apparent capacity to control his impulses, these attributes don't make for an easy time among hardened criminals twice his size. Not that Charlie hasn't developed a sense of self-awareness along the way. He requests and is granted smaller work details since he tends to cut up when he is around larger gangs. And at least he's got his wife, Rosalie. She's stayed on in L.A. to be near him, moving in with his mother, Kathleen. She dutifully comes to see her husband once a week throughout her pregnancy. Visits, especially from a woman, confer status among the inmates. Charlie puffs his chest out just a bit, adds spring to his strut whenever Kathleen comes by. Most times, though, he tries to keep a low profile. By 1956, he's spent enough time in institutions to know there are things to be learned beyond the simple courses they offered. He moves among the prisoners like a wraith, constantly observing the intimate and tangled power relationships around him, who owes who what, and who's risen or fallen in the pecking order. It's a constant dance of push and pull, hard meeting soft, the powerful and the vulnerable, those who do and those who are done to. The straights on the outside see prison as a jungle, and there's truth in that. But what Charlie figures is that it's all a jungle, whether inside the walls or out, an animal game of desire and frustration. He watches the other men as they play cards or hustle at basketball, hunch protectively over their food at mess, or engage in idle conversation that isn't idle at all but thick with subtext. Yes, there's much of value to be learned here, something he can use on the outside, that jungle beyond the jungle. We're all prisoners, Charlie figures, of each other's expectations, of small ways of thinking. But a lion who knows he's a lion has the advantage on a sheep who hasn't yet figured out he's a sheep. Illusions are there to be exploited.
In 1956, James and Arlene Barker bought a property in the rugged hill country of the Panamint Ridge in Death Valley. A small cabin had been put up around 1940 to support gold and uranium mining in the area, and the Barkers expanded it to a more spacious main house and several outbuildings. Accessible only by horseback or four-wheel drive, the Barker Ranch, as it would become known, was situated in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Summer temperatures could reach 130 degrees and might exceed 110 degrees for months on end. When Park Service Ranger Dick Powell and Highway Patrol Officer James Purcell headed out to the Barker Ranch on September 29th, they were looking for the red Toyota that might be connected to their arson suspects. They'd heard from locals that a group of hippies had taken over the place, but when the lawmen got there, they found only 2 young women who offered no useful information. A quick search of the property turned up no vehicles, so the officers got back in their car for the return trip. Not far from the ranch, they spotted a truck on the road and pulled it over to question the occupants. Behind the wheel was 46-year-old prospector Paul Crockett. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Brooks Poston, an affable 18-year-old. Upon questioning, the pair soon opened up about the new Death Valley residents, members of a cult called The Family. Trying to take it all in, the officers listened to tales of drug-filled orgies and dune buggy excursions into the wilderness to recreate General Rommel's Desert Corps. They were told about the impending race war called Helter Skelter and how the family would survive it by finding refuge in the bottomless pit, whose entrance was somewhere in this desert, how they would re-emerge after hundreds of years to rule the world. The group was led by a man named Charlie, who had convinced his followers he was the second coming of Christ. Of particular interest to the lawmen was that Brooks Poston, who had been a member of the group and only recently escaped, had seen weapons and heard talk of murders the family claimed to have committed. Both men pleaded with the officers to arrest the cultists before more violence could occur. The officers decided to have a further look around the property.
In this jungle within the jungle, it isn't the lions that interest Charlie the most, the predators with slitted eyes surveying terrain for easy prey. Their battles are in the open, matters of strength and ferocity. It is rather the jackals and hyenas, the wild dogs who make their way by wile and artifice, the silken-tongued pimps and slippery conmen who produce the miracle of making the other guy think the idea is his in the first place. Misdirection is their game, as it is with all street magicians, guile and salesmanship. It's the pimps Charlie can learn from most, and he listens for the music behind the words, the street song of grunt and growl, melody and cadence, fingertips running glissandos over the female heart. They're conductors, these smooth, hard men, and women, they're instruments. And they know what all liars and poets know. It's not in the words, but in the rhythms, the tones, cool and insinuating like some half-forgotten language. Come with me, baby, they sing, and all will be forgiven and made whole. And these young broken women hear their names rising above the din of the streets, the babble of 1,000,000 earthbound souls. They are seekers, these girls, with their soft, fractured hearts. And the pimp's words become notes of an impromptu symphony written only for them. Violence, the staccato drum beats of their foundling dreams. Charlie will learn in the ensuing years from self-help gurus and charlatans. He will have distant tutors who seem to be talking only to him. But he will never learn more than he is learning from these street pimps with their druggy eyes and jaundiced skin. Find that lost member of the herd, limping from the wounds of a distant father or lonely childhood. Touch that place of terror and hurt inside her, and open it to the light of your wisdom and kindness. You understand her in a way no one has or ever can. You are her savior because, like Jesus, you know suffering too, and there is no salvation but through suffering. You remind her that God is love, but also fear, for above all, he must be obeyed. love and pain. You know her because you have been her, are her. There is no right or wrong outside the word. Who can tell God what is right and wrong? Pain and love. They will do anything for you. They will work for you and fuck for you and suffer for you. They will die for you. You have become their savior God.
Not knowing what to make of the strange tales spun by Crockett and Poston, Park Service Ranger Powell and Highway Patrol Officer Purcell headed back to the Barker Ranch for a little more nosing around. Not far behind the ranch, they found 7 young women hiding amid the sagebrush. Most were naked or partially so. A tall young man disappeared into the terrain as the officers approached. A skinny redhead grinned unabashedly and said, "We're a Girl Scout troop. Would you like to be our scoutmaster?" Beyond that, the girls gave the same sing-songy, non-responsive answers the officers had gotten from the others they'd already questioned. But upon a further search of the area, the lawmen discovered the red Toyota they were looking for hidden under a tarp beside a dune buggy. Back at their Inyo County headquarters, the officers learned that the Toyota had been rented with a stolen credit card, and the dune buggy had been stolen from a car lot in Los Angeles. Between the arson, the stolen vehicles, and the stories they'd heard from Crockett and Poston, Inyo County officials decided further action was warranted. They began coordinating a joint raid with the Park Service, Highway Patrol, and Inyo County Sheriff's Office.
Charlie might not be a model prisoner, but for the most part he keeps out of trouble. With his first parole hearing set for April 22, 1957, he's assigned to a minimum security cell at Terminal Island. Prison officials note that he has the ability to control himself if the reward is big enough and close enough. But in March, Rosalie suddenly stops visiting. Kathleen tells her son that Rosalie and Charlie Jr. have moved out, that his wife is living with another man. Charlie suddenly finds himself in a place all too familiar. He might be surprised by Rosalie, but not by life. Whenever he sees even the smallest possibility of creating a normal family, it's pulled out of reach. He's lived through worse, and he'll live through this. He can either be life's slave or its master. But Charlie is Charlie. And with that comes the inability to escape himself. With his hearing only days away and parole virtually guaranteed, he is apprehended in the prison parking lot wearing civilian clothes, trying to hotwire a car. Early release is denied, and 5 additional years tacked onto his sentence. Charlie is Charlie.
It's that time of year again. Shorter days, cooler weather, cozy sweaters, and traveling to relatives' homes for the holidays. Forget bad weather, plane delays, and that one crazy uncle you have nothing in common with. The thing I'm dreading the most this holiday season is the lousy sleep I'm going to get from leaving my Casper mattress behind. It's been over 6 months since I got my Casper, and I am loving it. I swear I think my dreams have gotten better. You spend 1/3 of your life sleeping, so you should have something comfortable. Casper brand mattresses combine multiple supportive memory foams for a quality sleep surface with the right amounts of both sink and bounce. And Casper isn't just a mattress company. They have all the things you need for an overall better sleep experience. You get free shipping to the U.S. and Canada, and Casper has a 100-night risk-free sleep-on-it trial and no hassle returns if you're not completely satisfied. How great is that? Start sleeping ahead of the curve with Casper. Get $50 toward any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/LAcrime and using promo code LAcrime at checkout. That's casper.com/LAcrime. Promo code LAcrime. Terms and conditions apply. Love podcasts? Well, did you know you can listen to Young Charlie on Spotify while still enjoying your favorite tunes? It's the destination for all your audio, including Young Charlie and Hollywood and Crime. Just search for podcasts in the Browse tab in your Spotify app or head to spotify.com/podcasts. At 4 a.m. on October 10th, a small convoy of law enforcement vehicles made its way through the rough terrain of the Goler Wash in Death Valley. Officers from the National Park Service, the California Highway Patrol, and the Inyo County Sheriff's Office were heading for the Barker Ranch to conduct an early morning raid. A growing list of crimes seemed connected with a hippie encampment calling itself the Family. On the approach to the ranch, lawmen spotted two men asleep on the ground, a shotgun lying nearby. The pair was quickly taken into custody, and officers proceeded to Barker and nearby Myers Ranch, where other cult members were reported to be staying. Another lookout and 10 young women were soon apprehended, along with 2 infants. Searches of both ranches turned up 8 stolen vehicles, as well as a handgun and several knives. The prisoners were driven off to the county seat at Independence to be booked on charges ranging from arson to receipt of stolen property.
By the 1950s, the idea that prisoners may be rehabilitated rather than simply punished has gained traction across America. Terminal Island Penitentiary prides itself on offering inmates courses to help them reintegrate into society upon their release. Though opportunities are available for Charlie to improve his academic skills or learn one of a number of trades, only one program holds much interest for him. It's based on a popular book, divided into 4 parts: Fundamental Techniques in Handling People, 6 Ways to Make People Like You, How to Win People to Your Way of Thinking, and Be a Leader, How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment. Charlie has discovered Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Written in 1936, the book soon became a bestseller, leading to the creation of the Dale Carnegie Institute. By 1957, Carnegie's techniques have reached into the American penal system, with Terminal Island being one of the institutions offering the course. Charlie is immediately enthralled with a system that promises to build greater confidence, strengthen people skills, enhance communication skills, and develop leadership skills. Not since his discovery of music has Charlie found a tool so suited to his plan to elevate his position in life. As a relatively recent arrival at Terminal Island, he is far down on the list for admittance to the popular course. But prison officials believe it might provide just the opportunity for the difficult inmate to improve his social abilities. He is jumped ahead and allowed to take the course.
It was dark by the time the last of the officers had completed an inventory of the scene at Barker Ranch. As they drove back toward town, 2 young women emerged from the bushes and flagged them down. Frightened and bedraggled, the girls looked as if they'd been hiding in the wild for days. They begged the officers for protection, claiming they had escaped the family and were in fear for their lives. Their names were Kitty Lutzinger and Stephanie Schramm. Back in Independence, the officers learned that detectives from the LA County Sheriff's Office wanted to talk to Kitty about a stabbing death that had occurred back in July on Old Topanga Canyon Road. The victim's name was Gary Hinman, and Kitty's boyfriend, Bobby Beausoleil, was about to go on trial for his murder.
From the beginning, Charlie feels as though Dale Carnegie is speaking directly to him. All that he has known without putting into words, all that he has learned from the pimps and hustlers, or witnessed in the shadowy power struggles of the reformatories, is put in its proper light in the pages of the master's work. Begin in a friendly way, it says, and he knows this from the silken-tongued pimps. Talk about what the other fellow wants and show him how to get it. Like the con artist divining that buried desire. Make the other person feel important. Yes, baby, you're the only one I care about. Use showmanship, something Charlie knew long before meeting his first street hustler, when as a 5-year-old he'd dance and flail till he got what he wanted. Let the other fellow think the idea is his. Yes, nods Charlie, as words have finally formed into the perfect incantation of everything he has ever felt and not expressed. Prison officials note that though Charlie is barely literate, he excels in the course, showing no inability to comprehend when he feels the material might give him an edge. They are surprised, however, when he quits before completing the 4-month course. But he has learned all he needs from Dale Carnegie. Let the other fellow think the idea is his.
During the October 10th raid on Barker Ranch, investigators had counted more sleeping bags than they had prisoners, so it was likely some cult members had evaded arrest. More significantly, there had been no sign of the group's leader, Charlie, the so-called Messiah, who led his followers on excursions in the desert in search of the bottomless pit. The officers decided to return to Barker, and 2 days later, on October 12th, the team set out to conduct another raid. It was dusk as Park Ranger Powell and Highway Patrolman Purcell approached the property. They saw 2 men enter the main house and waited for their backup team to take up position. Then Powell covered the front door as Purcell circled round behind the house. Drawing his revolver, Purcell burst through the back door and found 7 people sitting around a kitchen table. He ordered them to place their hands on top of their heads. No one resisted, and the suspects were taken outside, searched for weapons, and handcuffed.
Charlie is granted early release from LA's Terminal Island on September 30th, 1958, 7 months shy of his 3-year sentence. Prison authorities write that his is a very difficult case, and it's impossible to predict his future adjustment. But he is kept out of trouble, and overcrowding demands that prison populations be reduced. Parole requires him finding employment, so he takes menial jobs until getting fired for something or other and moving on to the next. Meanwhile, he's confidently building the stable of girls he hopes will grow into a top LA call girl ring. It might be just Judy and Flo for now, and neither of them is much of an earner, but it's a start. When he moves out of Kathleen's and in with a more experienced pimp, he figures things are really going to get rolling. Only problem is, this guy turns out to be under FBI surveillance, and Charlie's parole officer gets wind of it. Charlie denies knowing anything, of course, but calling attention to himself is the last thing he needs. The glamorous life eludes him further yet when Judy's father gets wind of what he's up to and calls the cops on him. He goes through more girls, but most of them don't know what they're doing and none last. His dreams of pimp stardom fading, Charlie is arrested on May 1st when he attempts to pass a forged U.S. Treasury check at a Ralph's supermarket. It's for all of $37.50, but with Charlie, one thing has a way of leading to another. When he tells the police he stole the check out of a mailbox, he's implicated himself in 2 federal offenses. His brief pimping career does yield at least one benefit. One of his girls, Leona Ray Musser, shows up to tell his parole officer she's pregnant with Charlie's child. Another tearful appearance at his trial has its effect on the judge. The mail theft charge will be dropped if Charlie pleads guilty to the forged check. He's given a 10-year suspended sentence. But his near brush with more prison time doesn't seem to have much effect on Charlie. 3 months later, in December 1959, he's arrested for transporting women across state lines for purposes of prostitution, a violation of the Mann Act. He was heading to Lordsburg, New Mexico with Leona and another girl in hopes of expanding his prostitution empire. By now, Leona really is pregnant, and Charlie marries her knowing she can't be forced to testify against her husband. But there's nothing in the law preventing her from testifying voluntarily, if it'll save her own skin, which is exactly what she does. Back in Los Angeles, while the case is being prepared, Charlie augments his criminal career by stealing credit cards and hotwiring the occasional car. He's even found time to print up business cards for 3 Star Enterprises, an outfit purporting to be involved in nightclub, radio, and TV production. Introducing himself as president of the non-existent company, he cons a young woman out of her savings, then drugs and rapes her roommate. Before his trial date on the Mann Act charges, he flees Los Angeles and is soon apprehended in Laredo, Texas. He's extradited back to California to appear before the same judge who allowed him probation in September. This time, the judge is not so lenient, and there is no pregnant wife to plead for mercy. For violating the terms of his probation, Charlie is sentenced to serve out his 10-year term. Though the Mann Act charges will eventually be dropped, in July 1959, Charlie is sent to the United States Penitentiary on McNeil Island in Washington State.
It was night by the time the prisoners were ready to be transported back to Independence following the second raid on Barker Ranch. Highway Patrol Officer Purcell decided to take one last look around inside the house. It was pitch dark when he entered, but he found a homemade candle flickering in a glass mug. The place was dead quiet. The candle cast dancing shadows on the walls as he moved around, peering into the rooms. He entered a bathroom, checked the shower stall, then noticed a small cabinet under the sink. A few scraggly strands of long, dark hair were caught in the closed door. The space seemed too small for anyone but a child, but as he brought the candle closer, the door started to open. Startled, he almost dropped the candle as he reached for his revolver. To his astonishment, a tiny form emerged, unfurling himself like a stick figure come to life. He was barely over 5 feet tall, dressed in buckskins, with a dense mat of dark hair and scruffy beard. He grinned at the officer as if climbing out of a bathroom cabinet were the most natural thing. "Hi," he said affably. Officer Purcell quickly regrouped and warned him not to make a false move or he'd blow his head off. Then the officer asked his name. The odd little man in buckskins replied without hesitation, "Charlie Manson." Young Charlie by Hollywood and Crime is brought to you by Rockstar Games and LA Noire, the dark detective crime thriller set among the violence, glamour, and corruption of 1940s Los Angeles. Out now for Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS4, LA Noire allows you to scour crime scenes, pick up and examine objects, interrogate witnesses, and determine who is telling the truth or lying to cover up a brutal murder. Solve crimes inspired by real cases from one of LA's most violent decades. LA Noire from Rockstar Games, out now, rated M for mature. Order now at rockstargames.com/LA Noire. Drunk driving fatalities are 100% preventable, and it's up to you to do your part. All it takes is for one person to give a damn to save lives. Take a lift, get a ride, designate a driver. Whatever you do, care enough to get home safely whenever alcohol is involved. Your friends, family, and neighbors will all thank you for it. This is a message from Budweiser, reminding you to give a damn. Don't drive drunk.
Manson is making progress for the first time in his life. Officials at McNeil Island Penitentiary write in September 1961, he appears to have developed a certain amount of insight into his problems through his study of this discipline. The discipline referred to in Charlie's annual progress report is Scientology. Since entering the facility at age 26, Charlie has developed an interest in the growing self-help cult founded less than a decade earlier by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard. Having learned of it from a fellow inmate, Charlie quickly gains a working knowledge of its precepts and starts listing Scientologists as his religion. Ideas like karma and reincarnation hold a fascination for Charlie, and, as with Dale Carnegie, there is much in Hubbard he feels can be turned toward the end of manipulating others. The fantastical elements of Scientology, with its belief in extraterrestrial entities animating the cosmos, may be repurposed by the young convict who still hopes to build a stable of prostitutes. What damaged young woman might not find appealing the possibility of removing the hurtful engrams, holding back her spiritual progress? What lost soul would turn away Charlie's offer of assisting the Thetans' transit through the cycles of rebirth? Prison officials observe that Charlie can dramatize situations to hold the listener's interest. And in Scientology, there is much for Charlie to dramatize. He can easily imagine himself imparting to rapt listeners the proper path to that final level of clear. Even more significantly, prison officials might observe Charlie engaged in the kind of positive behaviors that might impress, and that wouldn't hurt when it came time to consider his release. But the conclusion reached by the staff at McNeil is less sanguine. They see his attempts to find himself as superficial at best, representing a desire for attention. They perceive very little real change in his demeanor and recommend continuation of institutional treatment. In the fall of 1963, Charlie learns that Leona has been granted a divorce in Denver, Colorado. He will never see his second son, Charles Luther Manson.
On the ride back to Independence following the Barker Ranch raid, Charlie felt comfortable enough with the officers to expand on his ideas about the coming revolution. He warned them of the war between blacks and whites and how, as law enforcement, they were in particular danger. It would be best for them, he suggested, to let the prisoners go and flee for their lives. The lawmen felt no such inclination, but allowed the buckskin-clad desert prophet to ramble on. What particularly interested Highway Patrolman Purcell was the way Charlie interacted with the other family members. They were all riding in the flatbed of the same truck, and whenever the young women became too silly or unruly, all it took was a glance from their diminutive leader to quiet them down. And when Charlie made one of his frequent observations or pronouncements, it would invariably receive an amen and nods of assent from his tiny flock. When they reached Independence, the new prisoners were booked and placed in holding cells near their Confederates taken in the earlier raid. That made 27 in total, including their self-styled Messiah. The man they all simply called Charlie gave his full name as Manson Charles M., a.k.a. Jesus Christ, God.
At first, Alvin Creepy Carpus doesn't have much use for the little runt. Prison friendships, if you can call them that, are always intricate plays of need and opportunity, about figuring what the other guy wants and what he's willing to pay. Besides, Alvin's awed enough young inmates with tales of his days with the notorious Mob Barker gang. Last thing he needs is some punk looking for cover under the shadow of his impressive history. But Charlie is nothing if not persistent, hanging around the older con until the occasional grunt or nod turns into conversation. And what the kid wants is the last thing Alvin expected: guitar lessons. Seems he thinks he's the next Frankie Lane or something, and he'll tell anyone who'll listen. Though the aging Alvin's Depression-era life of bank robbery and murder are long behind him, his steel guitar skills are undiminished, and Charlie's there to learn a thing or two. Alvin isn't much impressed by Charlie or his music, but time passes slow when every day's the same as the last, and sometimes a little interesting conversation is all you can look forward to. Charlie might not be any Frankie Lane, but interesting he is, with his talk of Scientology one minute and pimping the next. So, if what it takes to pass the time is teaching the little upstart a few licks, well, that isn't too steep a price to pay. And with what he's hearing on the radio these days, who's Alvin to say who the next Frankie Lane might be?
Following the second raid on the Barker Ranch, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detectives Paul Whiteley and Charles Gunther drove 225 miles to Independence to question Kitty Lutzinger. Kitty, 17 years old and pregnant with Bobby Beausoleil's child, did not hold back. While living with the family, she'd heard that Charlie had sent Bobby and two of the girls to Gary Hinman's place to get some money that was supposedly owed over a bad drug deal. Hinman refused and was killed. Kitty couldn't recall who'd told her the story, but it seemed to be confirmed when one of the two girls, Susan Atkins, talked about stabbing a man in the legs during a fight. No Susan Atkins had been booked following the raid, but one Sadie Mae Glutz had. It seemed Charlie was in the habit of giving his followers new and often whimsical names, and Sadie was in fact Susan Atkins. The detectives found Susan still in custody in Independence and questioned her about Hinman. Her version was that Hinman had recently come into some money. Though Charlie wanted it for the family, she never said he told Beausoleil and the girls to kill the music teacher. When Hinman denied having any money, Bobby slashed his face with a knife. For 2 days, Bobby beat and tortured him before finishing him off with a stab wound to the chest. Then he stashed the murder weapon in the wheel well of Hinman's station wagon, hot-wired it, and he and the girls drove back out to the Spahn Ranch. She did not admit to taking part in the murder and made no mention of stabbing anyone in the legs. It was understandable that she wouldn't want to implicate herself beyond what she felt the investigators already knew. Nonetheless, considering her first-hand account of Hinman's death, Susan Atkins was booked on suspicion of murder. But one thing stuck out in the detectives' minds. Hinman had not been stabbed in the legs. But one of the Cielo Drive victims had. Wojtek Frykowski.
Sometimes the world changes in a moment. Charlie might not be able to pinpoint exactly when it was, but he knows there was a before, and now there is an after, and things will never be the same. He has taken what he can from Dale Carnegie and L. Ron Hubbard. He's found ways into people's inner lives of hurt and desire, the soft spots that, if manipulated just so, can gain him access to the centers of will. He has taken what he can from the hard men and streetwise slicksters, learned to navigate the currents of human lust and fear. But what he has not had is a goal, worthy of the powers he has always felt he had. A goal beyond making a life through pimping and petty crime. That cannot be the purpose of his life he now sees. Amazed it took so long for him to realize it, but his future has reached back to him with a clarity he has never known. It calls to him in his cell at McNeil Island, as it calls to the young American generation in the comfort of their living rooms. Startling, fresh voices have reached across the ocean into every home in every city and town. The old might not understand, but the young have entered new realms, about to coin a novel language of hope and expectation. Those voices, heralding the dawning age, have reached even into the prison walls at McNeil, perplexing the older cons who turn the dials on their tinny transistor radios to find the music that was before and will never be the same. The world has turned on its axis, and it seems as if no one in the prison has noticed but Charlie. As 1963 turns into 1964, a new age of man has begun. The Beatles have arrived.
Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham didn't know what to make of their new cellmate. Finding themselves housed at Sybil Brand Detention Center in downtown LA was not a new experience for either of them. Though Ronnie was in for forging a drug prescription and Virginia on a parole violation, they'd known each other for years as prostitutes, had even gone out on calls together. And during their various incarcerations, both women had encountered a variety of oddballs and street people. But Crazy Sadie, as they started calling her soon after her arrival, was a whole new species of weird. She would laugh inappropriately at pretty much anything, improvise nonsense songs, and dance wildly for no reason. Most of all, she would brag about things people shouldn't be bragging about, at least not to strangers. Ronnie and Virginia understood the need for adopting poses behind bars, to keep away unwanted advances, to intimidate potential aggressors. And yes, Sadie seemed to relish getting reactions from the two women. But her odd behavior didn't seem put on, and her stories conveyed a sense of first-hand experience. When Sadie and Ronnie were made runners as part of their jail work assignment, they would spend idle time talking about their lives and the twisted paths that had brought them there. But when it came to Twisted, Virginia felt she was no match for the young prisoner. At night in their cell, Ronnie also proved a good listener. And if there was anything crazy Sadie, aka Susan Atkins, appreciated, it was an attentive audience. Because she really loved to talk. Next time on Young Charlie, the Summer of Love. It's 1967, and Charlie finds himself in the middle of San Francisco's Summer of Love. Just out of prison, he relocates to Haight-Ashbury and starts building his following. His first disciple is Mary Brunner, a lonely librarian from Wisconsin. More will soon follow. This is Hollywood and Crime from Wondery. Subscribe to Hollywood and Crime on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. To find out more information, read our episode notes and contact us if you have any questions or comments. If you like what you've heard, we'd love you to give us a 5-star rating and review us. And be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. Young Charlie is written and directed by Larry Brand. Hollywood and Crime is created and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, John Ponder, and Tracy Patton, and produced by Jim Carpenter. Young Charlie was recorded at The Invisible Studios, West Hollywood, California, and Blue Room Post in Manhattan Beach, California. Executive producers Ben Adair and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.